Good evening and welcome to the celebration of the first International Yoga Day. In the picture we see the celebration that took place in India today with 40,000 people, including the Prime Minister of India, performing yoga asanas. The Ultimate Flying Club is extremely happy to welcome you tonight to the MUM celebration of the first International Yoga Day. My name is Dimitrios Karasis and I'm the president of the Ultimate Flying Club of Maharishi University of Management. When we think of yoga in the Ultimate Flying Club, a very wonderful and favorite verse comes to mind from one of the ancient texts of yoga, which is called Shiva Sanhita, and the verse says, Yogi padmasanas topi puvamutsridhyavartate vayu siddhis tada gneya sansara dvantanasini, which means when the yogi, though remaining in the lotus position, can lift up in the air and leave the ground, then know that he has gained vayu siddhi, success over the air, which destroys the darkness of the world. This is how it is put in the Vedic literature. Yogic flying destroys the darkness of the world. And this has been certainly demonstrated by the many scientific studies on yogic flying. And this is why we thought we can start our celebration tonight by celebrating this ultimate technology of yoga, yogic flying, with a tape of Maharishi explaining the tremendous freedom a person experiences during the liftoff in yogic flying.
And finally, Maharishi, while we're on the subject of deep knowledge, this is a question, a simple, innocent question that's come up before, and that is why meditation creates bliss. In the news conference I watched last week, Maharishi said that yogic flying creates an upsurge of bliss within the practitioner. And throughout the ages, meditation has been called the key to true happiness. But the inner nature of life, as Maharishi said, is a flat, abstract, unmanifest field that is devoid of all qualities, heat and cold and pleasure and pain. So why is it that meditation creates feelings of happiness rather than feelings of nothing at all?
The thing is, the feeling is just like a prisoner being released. Someone who was in the prison for so long, now he is being released. What a bliss to him. All the time our body is attracted by the what we call gravity. Body is drawn in. And when one puts the sutra of the flying sutra, one is released of that dependence on gravity. So it's a release from gravity. It's such a joy, million times bigger joy than the prisoner being released. The prisoner being released is just an example to show that when he is under suppression, he is no more himself and all kinds of agony and all that. But when he is released, a big, huge opening from all those restrictions and all. Exactly, million times more the body, when the body is brought in freedom from the gravity, then the body rejoices that huge bliss. It is freed from the clutches of the bondage of attraction to some other power. Gravity, power of gravity, is holding the freedom of life back to itself. It draws in. And when the body lifts up, when the body rises above gravity, it's a big bliss rising. That is the explanation we can give in short. Huh? There is a word, I think it's common everywhere, mind over matter. It's just the thing. Generally, the matter keeps the mind within boundaries of space and time. I see like that, hear, and taste and touch and all. It's all within boundaries. And boundaries are freed. One sees far beyond the eyes can see. One hears far beyond the ears can hear. So this is we can not only say that is the reality, one goes beyond the boundaries, one goes beyond the bounds, one goes into freedom. That's how we look at it, huh? It's a beautiful question,
This is some brief words from Maharishi on this ultimate technology providing freedom from all boundaries, as he's saying, including the boundary of gravity. And now it's our very great joy to welcome Dr. William Sands, who will explain the difference between the path of yoga and the state of yoga in Maharishi Vedic science. Dr. Sands is Dean of the College of Maharishi Vedic Science and Associate Professor of Maharishi Vedic Science and Sanskrit at MUM. He earned an MA and PhD from Maharishi University of Management, an MSCI from Maharishi European Research University, and a BS in Business Administration from Georgetown University. He is the author of 2 books entitled Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and His Gift to the World, and Maharishi's Yoga, The Royal Road to Enlightenment. He has also published a number of articles, including Dharma in the Valmiki Ramayana in the light of Maharishi Vedic science, and Maharishi's program of reading the Vedic literature, unfolding the total potential of natural law. So it's our great joy, and we're very honored to welcome Dr. Sands.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Dimitrios, and thank you to the Yogic Flying Club, which is such a fantastic representative of yoga and yoga philosophy and the practical application of yoga for our university, and a great example for the whole world. I wanted to talk a little bit this evening about yoga, the path of yoga and the state of yoga, and the distinction between the two, and how the distinction has influenced the development and growth of the modern day interpretations of yoga. When we look through, if you look through the internet as a good example, you can find hundreds, if not thousands, of different sites on yoga. There's many, many different programs, interpretations, philosophies, some rather loosely based upon the ancient Sanskrit texts. Some are the pure creations of modern day and very well-meaning teachers. But in terms of defining what exactly yoga is, it can be very difficult. Yoga, there's so many different interpretations and so many different understandings. But Maharishi's been very clear about what yoga is, and he generally begins his answer by defining the term itself. Yoga means union, and it's derived from a Sanskrit verb that means to join, to put together, to unite. And in Maharishi's interpretation, yoga primarily is it's the coming together of individual awareness with cosmic awareness, with our individual consciousness, which we all are very familiar with, which is the source of or basis of our thinking, our feelings, our emotions, our hopes and dreams, and so forth. And cosmic awareness, of course, we locate deep within each of us. As Maharishi has pointed out many times, and as we experience twice every day, there is within each of us a vast, infinite reservoir of energy, creativity, and intelligence, a field of pure consciousness, pure being, pure wakefulness. And it's an infinite source of creativity and energy and intelligence. And when we experience it every day in our Transcendental Meditation and TM Siddhi programs, then what we do is we begin to bring it out into our activity. This deep inner state becomes integrated with our waking activity, and we, as we find, we grow to higher states of consciousness over time. So we have this understanding and this definition of yoga as a state. When we experience this inner self, we are experiencing the state of yoga, what Maharishi refers to as the state of yoga. In the terminology of yoga philosophy, it's called the experience of samadhi. Samadhi is the even state of awareness. And whether we're feeling as though our meditation is very superficial or whether it's very deep, we're nonetheless always experiencing some level of yoga. This is an important understanding, but it doesn't supplant the understanding of asanas and pranayama as being a part of yoga. We're not eliminating that with Maharishi's definition, but what we're doing is dividing it in the definition into two parts. There's the state of yoga, and then there's what's commonly understood as the path of yoga, or yoga practice, which includes asanas, includes breathing exercises called pranayama. It includes meditation itself, because meditation is a means to experience this state of yoga. But in the modern world, if we just look at, recall for just a second that beautiful picture in New Delhi celebrating the International Day of Yoga, which was proclaimed by the General Assembly of the United Nations, what we find is that the interpretation in the modern world is almost completely in terms of the physical aspect. It's completely in terms of the asanas and the pranayama and so forth. You didn't see a lot of people out there saying, well, this is a group that's just transcending and experiencing the state of yoga. But rather yoga is thought of in terms of the practice of yoga. Now, thinking of yoga as a state on one hand and thinking of it as a practice on the other hand may seem like a somewhat philosophical understanding, but in fact it's had enormous implications on how yoga is understood in the modern world. Because throughout the recent centuries, commentators and translators of the yoga texts, the great Sanskrit works of the Vedic literature, these commentators have generally interpreted the word yoga to mean a practice and have pretty much, not completely, but pretty much lost sight of the fact that the term often is referring to a state within. And the beautiful descriptions in the primary Sanskrit texts of the state of yoga are often thought to be descriptions of a practice. An example of that is in the Yoga Sutras. Many of you are familiar with the Yoga Sutras. And the Yoga Sutras are one of the, if not the basic text of yoga philosophy. And in the second sutra, and the sutra is a very short expression, that very short expression that gives some profound knowledge, and what usually follows in the analysis of these sutras is long commentaries by different people. And the second sutra defines what yoga is. And the sutra says, yogas chitta vritti nirodha. Maharishi translates that as yoga is the complete settling of the activity of the mind. Yoga is essentially that quiet state within. And this is how Maharishi translates and comments upon this particular sutra. But Maharishi is probably the only one in recorded history who has interpreted it that way. Most commentators translate it more like this. Yoga is the inhibition of the activity of the mind. And we as practitioners of transcendental meditation realize right at the outset that there has to be something wrong with that. In this interpretation, what the commentators and translators feel is that yoga is a practice. And what is the practice? The practice is trying to still the mind, trying to push out thoughts, push out feelings, push out emotions, and then one might attain the quiet state that is described so beautifully in the Vedic literature. We all may know a verse from the Nrisinghotara Tapaniya Upanishad that Maharishi is very fond of quoting. It says, Shivam Shantam Advaitam Chaturtam Manyante Sa Atma Savigneyaha. And it's describing Atma, the inner self. And it's saying that this state is a state of peace. It's a state of silence. It's a state of unity. It's a state that is a fourth state of consciousness. In other words, distinct from waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, which we normally experience the world through. And this, the last part of the expression, sa atma savigneyaha, this is Atma, this is to be known. And that this is to be known is very significant because the Upanishad is not only describing a philosophical concept, but it's saying it can and it should be experienced. And that's a very important thing. But modern commentators, and Maharishi meant by modern anything within the last few hundred, even few thousand years. That's what we mean by modern commentators. Have tended, because for so many years the technique of transcendental meditation wasn't available, the commentators have thought how to have this experience, how to experience this inner state that is peaceful and quiet. And the thought has been, well, by making yourself peaceful and quiet, by pushing out thoughts, by pushing out feelings, by concentrating or focusing on a single object, by trying to make the mind peaceful. And that interpretation of the Yoga Sutras, of Yoga's Chitta Vritti Nirodha, the yoga is the inhibition of the activity of the mind, is trying to do just that. It's trying to eradicate activity. But we know as meditators that this is not a good interpretation because it's far, far from our experience. We know that in order to experience the quiet state, we must go inwards. We must become less and less active. We must allow the mind to take its natural course and to become progressively more and more silent, more and more quiet. And if there's anything from our side, any individual activity, some concentration or contemplation or tendency to try to create that stillness, then what we do is create more activity in the awareness. And creating more activity doesn't lead to the quiet state, it leads to the more active states. It leads to the very surface of the mind. So this interpretation from our experience can't possibly be so. But Maharishi's interpretation of yoga as that state of inner awareness is something that matches very much with our experience. In fact, Maharishi, when he describes the Yoga Sutras, says that they're not a how-to manual. They're not a description of how to practice yoga, as most commentators think. Rather, they're a description of the state of yoga, the description of the state of yoga as it's experienced within, and the description of higher states of consciousness, culminating in Brahmi Chaitana, in the state of unity consciousness, a fully developed state of unity consciousness. That is the supreme state of yoga, because in that state also, an individual's individual awareness is completely unified with cosmic intelligence. So when Maharishi talks about the state of yoga, and when Maharishi interprets texts in terms of yoga, he's interpreting them not only as a description of the inner state, but also of higher states of consciousness. So what is this fundamental understanding, what has it done to modern yoga practice and modern yoga understanding? I wanted to read a few selections from a paper that I created, or a presentation that I gave at a conference a couple of years ago at the International Vedanta Conference. And this was a conference that was primarily attended by Indian scholars and Indian practitioners of yoga and practitioners of Vedic philosophy. And I wanted to see how they would react to a very clear contrast between Maharishi's interpretation and that of as we say, the more modern scholars. And so the paper chose 3 or 4 different commentators. One of them is Madhvacharya, who was a 14th century proponent of Vedanta, so a 14th century, that's clearly a very, very modern scholar. This was an earlier 20th century scholar named Sridhara Swami, and also a very modern 20th century translator named Swami Chidbhavananda. And so what I did in this conference was looked at some of the verses from the Bhagavad Gita, particularly the ones that Maharishi had paid great emphasis to, and see what they say. How did they interpret those verses? And then see what Maharishi says. And so I started with, of course, all of our very favorite, which is the 45th verse of the second chapter. And that reads, Trigunyo Vishaya Veda Nistraigunyo Bhavarjun Nirdwando Nitya Sattvasto Niryoga Kshema Atmavan. And Maharishi translates this as, the Veda's concern is with the three gunas. Be without the three gunas, Arjuna. And then I'll go through the rest of the verse in a few seconds, but I wanted to focus on this, be without the three gunas. Now, the three gunas are traditionally understood as the three most fundamental impulses of natural law, three values of natural law that exist on the most refined level of the physical universe and are the cause of everything that takes place throughout the universe, throughout the physical universe. All of the creation and the activity and even our thoughts and feelings and behavior are all thought to be the expression of the three gunas. So Maharishi takes this quite literally. When Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita said, be without the three gunas, then how Maharishi interpreted that was, yes, absolutely, be without the three gunas. Take the awareness from the surface level of the mind, go deep within, and then transcend completely and experience that element of life that is beyond the physical world, beyond the thoughts, beyond our feelings, the transcendental level, the inner self. And other commentators, not having that ability to transcend, or not knowing of a technique to transcend, took this verse a little bit more philosophically. And I want to read some of their comments. Now, the point here is not to criticize these commentators. They're very well-meaning, very brilliant individuals, scholars, who wrote at a time when there wasn't ready access to a technique of transcending. So we can't criticize them. In fact, we really have to uphold and laud them for their attempts to gain the enlightened state of life. But not having a Maharishi to teach them, they took recourse to the best that they could. And one of them, Swami Chidbhavananda, suggests that the pairs of opposites are inevitable in the phenomenal existence. When a person refuses to be affected favorably or adversely by these happenings, and when he maintains his even-mindedness, he is said to be making progress in self-culture. In other words, he is interpreting be without the three gunas to mean create an attitude of being beyond the physical universe. Hold yourself as being a transcendental being and not affected by the ups and downs of life. The reference to the pairs of opposites in that quote referred to those events such as pleasure and pain, success and failure, heat and cold, happiness and sorrow. These are the so-called pairs of opposites. And so the suggestion that one should be beyond the pairs of opposites in the mind of most commentators is that one should try to have an attitude of not being affected by the pairs of opposites. What Maharishi referred to in this age as mood-making, having an attitude that one is not affected by this or by that. And Maharishi's comment on that kind of thinking is that it's a little bit like a poor man feeling that he's wealthy and taking the idea that I'm going to walk through life and I'm wealthy. I'm a rich man. I can go into the market and I can do anything. But the reality is the rich person or the poor person walks into the market and really can't do anything because it's just a mood or an attitude. And the same way, thinking I am beyond the pairs of opposites, I am just a transcendental being, doesn't help with the experience or the growth of enlightenment. What's necessary for that is to transcend. Looking at the second part of this verse, Nirdvando nitya sattvasto niryoga kshema atmavan. which Maharishi translates as freed from duality, ever firm in purity, independent of possessions, possessed of the self. Now, one commentator felt that this again was an instruction on how one should live one's life, an instruction on how one should behave. One should rise above the pairs of opposites like pleasure and pain, etc., absolutely unconcerned about the fulfillment of wants and the preservation of what has been already attained. You be self-controlled. So you can see the difference between that and Maharishi's interpretation, which is, in Maharishi's view, it's describing the inner state. When one is freed from duality, ever firm in purity, independent of possessions, possessed of the self, that's the key, atmavan, possessed of the self. It's describing the internal experience of atma, the experience of the state of yoga. It's not meant to be a direction on how one should behave in life. Not having that experience, then it was seen to be an instruction from Lord Krishna to try to be above the pairs of opposites, to not want, not desire, not be affected by the external life. Now the thing about this is a very important point of Maharishi's philosophy, and that is these qualities grow spontaneously in our lives from regular practice of transcendental meditation. It's not that Maharishi is ignoring them in terms of behavior. What he's saying is that we don't make a mood, we don't have an idea about them, we don't try to have an attitude of acting in a certain way, but rather by experiencing the inner self, then these deep fundamental qualities that are the qualities of our own self-referral nature, these qualities begin to grow spontaneously. They begin to grow in such a way that one becomes naturally fulfilled. One's desires naturally don't overshadow one so much. There are always desires in life. One always may have a preference of food, or one may want to achieve a certain activity. But as one grows in consciousness, one finds that one is no longer overshadowed by the desires. One doesn't become obsessive about something that one wants or one loses. And one's ability to fulfill one's desires becomes much, much, much simpler. And one reason for that is that the nature of the inner self, the nature of Atma, is bliss. It's pure bliss. There's a beautiful expression in the Taittiriya Upanishad that describes this quality. It describes the fundamental reality of life not only as a state that is blissful, but as bliss itself. You may have heard it many times from Maharishi. It says, Ananda dhyeva kalvimani bhutani jayante. Ananda jatena jivanti. Anandam prayantya bisamvishanti. From bliss these beings are born. In bliss they are sustained, and to bliss they go and merge again. Again, the description is not of this pure intelligence that is the ultimate reality of life as blissful. It is bliss itself. And as we continue our practice of Maharishi's programs and Maharishi's techniques, we find that bliss growing and growing in our life such that fulfillment comes more from within than from without. This doesn't mean that one doesn't appreciate or enjoy the environment. Of course we do. In fact, it gives us a ground for enjoying it even more. But if there's some occurrence in life that's not as charming as others comes along, then one wouldn't be overshadowed by it. One becomes less overshadowed by it as consciousness grows, because fulfillment starts to become much more powerful and more profound from the inside. So this is Maharishi's message of this verse. It's not teaching us how to behave, it's teaching us about the state itself. Of course, in this Trigunya Bhava, be without the three gunas is giving an instruction that, of the value of transcending. But the second part explains what one experiences when one does transcend. Let's see how we're doing for time. I can read one or two of these. Another one that those familiar with Maharishi's teaching are very familiar with, and that's the 48th verse of chapter 2. Yogastha kuru karmani sangam tyaktva dhananjaya. Siddhya siddhyo samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchyate, which Maharishi translates as, established in yoga, a winner of wealth, perform actions, having abandoned attachment, and having become balanced in success and failure. For balance of mind is called yoga. This is a very important verse in Maharishi's Maharishi's teaching, because yogastha kuru karmani means established in yoga, established in the self, established in pure consciousness, then perform action. That's almost a prerequisite for any type of activity, a prerequisite for any success in life, or for the great success that we all naturally can come to. But it's been interpreted very, very widely. If you look at different Gitas, it depends on how one interprets the term yoga. And there are many, many different interpretations of it. But a common one is that it's just some feeling or attitude of balance in life. And I'll read you a commentary by one of the commentators I listed earlier, where he says, "The yogi holds all the activities taking place in him as the doings of the Lord. He places himself in the position of a willing servant, ever ready to execute orders. An attitude of this kind eliminates attachment." So that's how you can break the attachment that was described, having abandoned attachment. Another one of the commentators says, "The nature of the mind is to be elated in success and dejected in failure. But by remaining unperturbed by either, the mind gains in clarity and firmness. He is a yogi who keeps his mind in this poised state under all circumstances." So you can see that the interpretation of yogastha as a description of the experience of cosmic consciousness in this case, which is a more mature state of yoga, which is Maharishi's, and the other comments which are more in terms of a practice, established in this practice in which one has or maintains a mood or an attitude of evenness, of not having attachments. Other verses talk about not having possessions. All of these are descriptions of the qualities of intelligence that are inherent within each of us. And I think I'm running out of time, but so I'll close with that. But this gives us a very clear understanding of the distinction between Maharishi's teaching and that of other modern commentators. And Maharishi, what he's essentially has done is put the horse back in front of the cart. We don't behave in a certain way in order to achieve yoga. We experience the state of yoga, and that enables us to rise in our own behavior, not just to feeling more satisfied and more happy and more coherent and so forth, but to live a life that's fully in accord with natural law, fully in accord with nature's functioning. And that would be a glorious life for us all. And we're very fortunate to celebrate this wonderful day, this International Day of Yoga, because in doing so, we really celebrate Maharishi's gift to all of us, that we have this fantastic technology of consciousness that can allow us to rise to the true ideals of yoga. Thank you very much.
Dr. Sands would like to thank you very, very much for this brilliant and very complete exposition of what yoga is. It's really that state of enlightenment, that state of going beyond everything and experiencing that ultimate freedom that Maharishi described in the tape that we saw. And now we'd like to invite Dr. Peter Freund. Dr. Peter Freund is on faculty in the Maharishi Vedic Science Department at the university. And he is someone who all the members of the Ultimate Flying Club of the university look up to because of his great excellence in yogic flying. Certainly one of the absolute champions of yogic flying in the yogic flying capital of the United States here in Fairfield. Absolute champion. And Dr. Freund is a Vedic scholar who has been doing research and collecting the texts of the ancient Vedic literature that have been missing, that have not been published. He has been collecting them and publishing them in the website mum.edu/Vedic Reserve. So it's a very great joy to welcome Dr. Freund.
India is a country rich in its traditions, age-old traditions. Many of the knowledge traditions of India are preserved in written form, and there are more than 1 million handwritten manuscripts in India preserving the Indian legacy of ancient Vedic knowledge. Yoga is an ancient tradition of knowledge of life which emphasizes direct experience rather than philosophical conjecture. It is one of the 6 systems of Indian philosophy. There's a rich literature of yoga going back thousands of years. The 3 main texts of yoga are the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, the Shiva Sutra, and the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. The oldest text of yoga is the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. We don't actually know when the seer Patanjali lived. It could have been many, many thousands of years ago, but the Yoga Sutra was already an established authoritative text 5,000 years ago at the time of the great Mahabharata war, when sage Vedavyasa wrote a commentary on it. Vyasa is the author of the Mahabharata, the 18 Purana, and the Brahma Sutra, and he wrote an excellent, detailed commentary on the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. It is through Vyasa's exalted commentary that the Yoga Sutra have come down to us. There are 4 chapters called padas, dealing with samadhi, principles of practice, development of higher powers, and the state of enlightenment, the completely integrated, self-sufficient state of life in unity consciousness. This is the text which describes the 8 limbs of yoga: yama, niyama, pratyahara, asana, pranayama, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. This is the source text on which the principles and practice of Maharishi's TM City program is based, and this is also the source of the knowledge of yogic flying. There are 195 sutras written in the ancient Sanskrit language. They are very concise, pithy aphorisms. In Maharishi Vedic science, we learn that the first expression of a text contains the wholeness of knowledge of the text, and the last expression is a summary of the whole. Let's listen to the recitation of the beginning and ending sutras of the Patanjali Yoga Sutra.
Atha yogaha prathamam sutram atha yoganuशासनम् antima sutram purusharthashunyanam gunanam pratiprasavah kaivalyam swarupa pratishtha chitti shaktiriti.
The goal of yoga, explicitly described in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, is to bring to direct experience the full infinite potential of man. The key to unfolding the latent infinite potential inherent in the nervous system of every human being is the direct experience of the infinite. The human nervous system is capable of going beyond limited boundaries of perception and action and experiencing the abstract, infinite totality of life. The direct experience of infinity, of infinite abstraction, is called samadhi in Sanskrit, and we call it, in modern terms, transcendental consciousness. It is a distinct fourth state of consciousness, completely different from waking, dreaming, and sleeping states of consciousness. And this experience is the central teaching of yoga. Maharishi explains that transcendental consciousness is unique in that it puts the whole brain to function. Only the experience of transcendental consciousness, he says, makes use of the total brain physiology. Only the experience of transcendental consciousness, the unbounded, infinite, unmanifest field of life, the field of consciousness, that only is competent to make full use of the human brain. Only the practice of transcendental meditation makes use of the full brain, as proven through so many scientific reports. Only the experience of transcendental consciousness makes use of the full brain. And unless man uses the full brain, partially using the brain, he will be stumbling against partial achievements, which will never satisfy him. And this is a description, this is a graphic portrayal of EEG during the practice of transcendental meditation on the right, and of a non-meditator with eyes open and eyes closed. You see there's very little coherence, and then a great deal of coherence of the same person 3 months later practicing the transcendental meditation program. Here is a deeper look at the anatomy of the brain, showing the cortex of the brain. Notice that there are wrinkles in the brain, like a walnut. Notice also that there are 4 distinct regions of the brain, shown here with different colors. The brain is a very precisely designed instrument. Currently, there are many, many billions on Earth, and each one has the exact same structure. There are 4 broad divisions of the brain, and on a finer level, there are these folds called gyri, and the pattern of the gyri in each brain is not random. These are the same for every human being. From each gyrus, bundles of association fibers proceed to their targets, connecting together and unifying the different parts of the brain. Each part of the brain physiology has a specific function or responsibility, and this wiring of the human nervous system is the same everywhere, in all races of man, in all cultures, in all religions, now and in all times in the past. Dr. Tony Nader has made the absolutely amazing discovery that the Vedic literature is actually a blueprint of the intelligence of nature which has structured the human physiology. No correlation is more clear and striking than the correlation which he discovered for yoga. Every sutra of yoga corresponds to a specific group of unifying fibers connecting the 195 gyri in the brain. Dr. Nader says, from the correspondence of the structure and function of the Yoga Sutra and the association fibers of the cortex, they have the same structure and both display the mechanisms of unification, integration, and coordination. We infer that the subtle variations generated by the sequential activity of the association fibers are the same as the sequentially organized sounds that form a sutra, the sound of a sutra. Therefore, the unifying function of brain physiology is demonstrated in the frequencies of the sequentially placed syllables of each sutra. The association fibers can be called yogic fibers. Let's take a look at these correlations between the sutras and the gyri in the brain. Note that the 4 regions of the brain correspond to the 4 chapters of the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. Dr. Tony Nader has laid out this correlation in exquisite detail, showing which sutra corresponds to the bundle of association fibers originating from each gyrus. These correlations are not random assignments. The knowledge of each sutra has an innate correspondence to the specific role of each gyrus in the functioning of the total brain. Notice that the sutras fit into the gyri. For long gyri, there are long sutras. For short gyri, the sutras are short. This is comprehensive knowledge of the architecture of the cortex with all its connecting fibers, unifying all the parts of the cortex into one grand wholeness, integrated, holistic brain functioning. There is a precise, detailed correspondence in structure and function between the 195 bundles of association fibers and the 195 sutras of the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. For this precious and amazing discovery of Veda and Vedic literature in human physiology, Dr. Tony Nader was awarded his weight in gold in 1998. This wonderful research has been published in several volumes, newly released. Yoga is an ancient knowledge of how to put the total brain to function and to experience infinity, totality. Now we see, on the basis of the research of Dr. Tony Nader, that the knowledge of yoga embodied in these 195 sutras is actually not man-made. It is apaurusheya. It is enshrined in the structure of the human nervous system, the human brain. Every human being on earth has these 195 gyri in their brain. Every human being has yoga in his or her physiology. Yoga is a universal property of every human being. Yoga is not at all an Indian philosophy. It is a science of life that is completely universal. It cannot be limited in time and space. It cannot be consigned to one nation or one culture. It belongs to everyone. The knowledge of yoga is like the blueprint that comes along with the house. This is how the human nervous system is designed. It is designed for the experience of infinity, the experience of samadhi. Every part of the brain has a role to play in the experience of wholeness, and the synthesis of all the parts together into one wholeness of universal, unbounded reality of life is described in exquisite detail in the Yoga Sutra, which is in truth the eternal working manual, the instruction book for how to make full use of the human nervous system, how to harness the total brain. This knowledge has been preserved in India, but it belongs to everyone by virtue of everyone having a human nervous system. It's completely appropriate that the United Nations has declared a day of yoga because yoga is a universal property which should be celebrated and applied by every single human being on earth in order to unfold his or her full potential as a human being. This is a great day of celebration. And what we are celebrating is this gift of God to man, the human nervous system, and how to use it in order to unfold heavenly life on earth, life in bliss, harmony, and affluence, the full potential of human existence made practical and lively on earth through the knowledge of yoga. Thanks to the United Nations for organizing this day of celebration of yoga. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Freund, for showing us how yoga is in our physiology. It's a completely natural thing, and that total brain functioning gained through TM and yogic flying is a completely natural thing. Now, in the following tape, Maharishi explains what is the evidence through which we can see that the programs that we just saw today are really developing the full potential of the individual and enabling the individual to live enlightenment, to function at their full potential. Of course, we can see that from the benefits in all areas of life through the research. It's more than 600 scientific studies, but in this tape, Maharishi explains it in terms of yogic flying, the body being able to lift up effortlessly from beyond gravity in yogic flying is a demonstration of the ability of the mind to function from its total potential. So let's please have this wonderful tape.
Maharishi, the press notes that each week you give all the credit for all the knowledge that you are bestowing upon the world to your own Master Gurudev. So the press is asking the question, from where did Gurudev get the knowledge? They had understood from things that you have said and written that he was a recluse sage in the hidden forests of the Himalayas and central India. So how did he get all of that knowledge that he was then able to give to you and you have now given to the whole world?
I got the knowledge from my Gurudev. My Gurudev got the knowledge from his Gurudev. He got the knowledge from his Gurudev. He got the knowledge from his Gurudev. All the knowledge descending down generation after generation. That is why we give credit to the source of knowledge. Ultimately, where is the knowledge? In your question you said very nicely. Where is the knowledge? The knowledge is, total knowledge is in the unmanifest, in the transcendental reality. Transcendental reality. So, what we want people to know from theory and practice, what we want people to know by way of knowledge and by way of action, what we want people to have is authority over the unmanifest. It is the unmanifest that is now discovered in terms of self-referral unified field. That in terms, Vedic terms, is yoga, Vedanta, the basis of all action. The basis of all action. We want to have our awareness fully awake on that level of reality which is in total self-referral. Being self-referral is transcendental. Being transcendental, it is the basis of all life. It's the basis of all life. Like, we always explain this in the example of hollowness of a banyan seed. The seed is hollow inside. Hollow means there is unmanifest. The whole tree, thousands of branches and leaves and flowers and fruits and all that, they are all in the unmanifest state. In that unmanifest value within the seed. This unmanifest value is what we align with. Our awareness is aligned with this field of the unmanifest. We say transcendental being, transcendental consciousness. And in this is this and that and everything. So the total field of knowledge is, we simply say, and derive mathematically and derive practically, experience it personally, on the level of the unified field, unified field, unified field. Now, what is the proof that our awareness is really awake on that level of the transcendental, self-referral, unified field? What is the proof of it? The proof of it is whatever thought we can promote on that level that thought will be supported by all the laws of nature. That's why we say unified field of all the laws of nature. The thoughts supported by all the laws of nature. What is the proof? The proof is in the yogic flying. Yogic flying, one sits, one takes our mind to the transcendent, and from there one thinks, I want to fly. And then immediately the body lifts up. Immediately the body lifts up. That means a thought of flying is immediately practically materialized. This is an example, this is a proof that one is thinking on that level which is lively in the total potential of natural law. What is this level? This is the level of control over gravity, force of gravity. One doesn't see gravity anywhere, but it is functioning everywhere. The huge galactic universe is governed by the force of gravity, the force that unifies all the different values, that is unifying and unified. So, body lifting up by mere thought proves that the thought has been promoted from that level, which is the level of the force of gravity, the intelligence of gravity. This is Vedic education. To gain commandment, to whatever extent, doesn't matter, very minute extent, the body lifting up, just even 6 inches lifting up, or 1 foot lifting up, or 5 feet lifting up, or 1 foot lifting up, any lifting up of the body against the force of gravity is a very clear demonstration of the power of the mind over the force of gravity, which is the administrative intelligence and energy of the whole diversity of the universe. This is Vedic education. Vedic education is not for becoming a servant of someone. It's not employment oriented. These words we hear. Education should be employment oriented. Those who do not know what education can be, they make a very short hit on the ultimate reality of education. Vedic tradition is the source of this knowledge. We want to be connected, always remain connected with the source of knowledge. That is why we say, Jai Guru Dev. All glory to Guru Dev. All glory to Guru Dev. Not that I am saying this, not that I am saying this. What I am here 5 years, 10 years, 100 years, and where I am gone. So that I, which is going to evaporate, has not much meaning in reality. What is meaningful is continuation of the total field of intelligence from point to infinity, from Anuraniyan to Mathomahyan, from point to infinity, from point to infinity, from point to infinity. This is Vedic wisdom. We are going to very soon start the Minister of Enlightenment of the global country of world peace has the commandment of His Majesty Raja Ram to start Vedic education around the world so that no one born in our dear world could remain less than fully developed. Everyone should have a command over total natural law. Yogic flyers everywhere. The world is going to be the lighthouse of, it won't be exaggeration to say, the world is going to be the lighthouse for angels to move around and enjoy. This is our playfield. This is our desire. This is our field of possibility. What the world has been doesn't matter. Forget about the past. Don't waste time on the past. Just don't waste time on the past. Have the hidden treasury of all infinity brought to the level of daily living. So the world is going to be a world of harmony, happiness, permanent peace on earth. Time is to change. Those who will not change today, they are going to change tomorrow. Tomorrow can mean even in the next generation, next generation, next generation. Very soon we are going to have our world rise above suffering. 2,000-year-old suffering has been enough for the world, and now no more.
Two-thousand-year-old suffering has been enough for the world, and now no more. With this message from Maharishi, we'll close tonight's celebration, and we'll hope that this beautiful day of yoga that was recently created by the United Nations becomes developed to its full value, and it becomes the day of yogic flying for the whole world, because 2,000-year-old suffering is enough for the world, as Maharishi explained. So thank you all for coming, and have a good night.